What is architecture?
I think architecture is probably one of the oldest professions for creating habitat for human beings, and a profession whose values and interpretations continue to evolve as its means and ends do. Cities have become our new habitat, and with the vast majority of people living near cities, and cities becoming multicultural, it's a profession that's now one that has to be open to a large multiplicity of values. So, an architect, a contemporary architect, must be a part engineer, part artist, um, part poet, part anthropologist, and should be able to pose questions and present possible answers. So, a practicing architect in the modern world has to be not only intellectually relevant, not only intellectually rigorous, but also, well, relativist in a sense. Um, as I say that, I realize that we're a profession that often takes itself too seriously. And I think that's why people who are not agreeable don't talk to one another.
What can architecture do?
Well, historically, architecture was meant to emote and perform, and that fundamental remains. But we realize that one of architecture's objectives is to humanize buildings and contribute not only to an individual's well being, but also the collective well being of society. Um, it should uplift the human spirit. Um, it can do so by promising, or well, by presenting the promise for a better future. So, architecture, uh, at the end of the day, architecture must form the backdrop for memories, and contribute in some way to society's progress. Good architecture is not about one perfect building. As you see, the cities are usually a juxtaposition of different eras and such. But so I think good architecture is about setting up dialogues using the tools at hand, which are scale, form, rhythm, material, contrast, conformity. Um, and architecture has to often choose whether it wants to be compelling or futuristic or provocative. Uh, Sometimes it can be meek, and sometimes it can become a tool for activism. Uh, so, as such, though, architecture should be multifaceted in its approach, as should cities. And architecture that is sort of multifaceted in its approach seems to be more meaningful, and definitely more meaningful than architecture which is homogenized, which, if it's homogenized, can also often become oppressive, and to that extent, architecture can sometimes also be a tool for oppression.
What is your architectural position?
I think we believe in evolution, and we believe that the return to traditionalism is a sloppy way of thinking, especially now that the large majority of mankind lives within cities. Um, it's important for architecture to not only exist within a building, but it also has to exist and influence what is outside a building. Um, and that's actually where the rest of the city exists. So, uh, so the architectural dialogue has to become a lot more progressive and engaging. Having said that, we're also living in a city in a time uh, where there are no more resources to consume, and we need to really rethink our strategy, our economic strategies, and our strategies for consumption, and therefore revisiting the past, not rehashing the past, but sort of revisiting the past and finding and giving certain physical constructs that exist new meaning, and regenerating them for the next few decades is important. And maybe that's one way of architecture compensating for its slow pace.
What is your design method?
Like I said, I think we take ourselves very seriously, and we're quite we're quite an intense studio. So we're often looking for reasons not to engage with the project. Um, and you might say that is lazy, but it's really not. I think it's a way to find, uh, or it's a way to ensure ourselves that when we engage with the project, there will be some authenticity or uniqueness uh, in our engagement. Um, I think once engaged, we do the usual, sort of iterative drawing and model making exercises. Um, More often than not, is to assimilate counterpoints, so that you have the genesis of a strong diagram that sort of and that diagram is in conversation within itself. Um, Personally, I'm drawn to the strategy of a project as well as tactile detailing, because I find what happens in the middle kind of boring, and I think that also kind of defines how architects how different kind of architects need to exist, because you need to have people who can really hold the middle together. um, and yeah, but I do tend to compose in a stream of consciousness, and I find it hard to externalize design processes. um, so whatever it is that I'm trying to express actually comes out through a diagram more than anything else. I do engage in a lot of cerebral processes because I'm not very good at drawing, and I'm not an academic. As a studio, our material strategy and our idea of detail is sort of firmly rooted in the study of the British high tech. Um, while the materials we use are sort of are from what we find in our context in India, uh, which are simpler, and or sort of not very complex, but we tend to use them in a very sophisticated manner. We use a lot of relaxed details and sort of disassociated layers and such. Um, so it forms an architecture that's of the region, but it's and it has a regional narrative, but the approach is actually fairly well, it's a different architectonic approach. The intent of creating an architecture that sort of reveals itself as you go along, and again, sort of is a juxtaposition of various things. And I often use the term polyrhythm because there are multiple layers that sort of tend to engage in themselves, um, with the overarching intent being that of creating an architecture that makes the user question what they're experiencing.